back to another solo lane video. Today we're going to be talking about the complete guide to the solo lane matchups. This is going to be part 2. It's been, I think, over a month since I made the first one, and I apologize for the bit of delay, but there's been a lot of meta changes going on, and I just didn't feel completely comfortable making the video with everything kind of just changing and, you know, certain matchups actually getting better or certain matchups getting worse and all that. So, but either way, that's what we're going to be talking about today. If you didn't see the first video, or you just want to get a quick refresher, the format is we're using the Smite tier list website. And what I've done is I've already gone ahead and put all the matchups in here, and I'm just going to go through and kind of give you a brief summary of why I think the matchups are the way that they are. So, for example, we have Arthur here at the top. It's going to be in gray, and it's just going to have Arthur up there. And then in green is going to be the good matchups. So these are the matchups that you want to pick into, that you'll do well in just inherently based on the God's kits. The 50-50 matchups are going to be the ones that are really close, very skill dependent, and depends on the jungler's influence in the lane. So if they gank a lot, if they don't gank a lot, it's going to really affect the lane. And then the bad matchups are obviously the matchups that you should try to avoid, especially this for you competitive players or people that are just trying to grind ranked. If you notice that they have like maybe a Camazotz or a Cerberus and you believe that it's going to be solo lane, then that's something, it's kind of a matchup that you'd want to avoid as King Arthur. So that's just how the format works. Before I get into explaining everything, I'm just going to go through and show you the matchups that I've already placed, just so, I don't know, maybe you're watching this video, you're just trying to, you know, you're in the middle of a ranked game and you really need to know the matchups for each of these gods, just so you can see what you can pick into. So King Arthur, here are his matchups. Mulan is up next. Here are her matchups. Nike up next. Here are her matchups. Odin, matchups. Osiris, here are all of his matchups. Sun Wukong. Tier, and Vamana. So you can screenshot that, or maybe you can just keep a mental note of it, check it out, pause the video, and check it out there. But if you want to hear my explanations of each of the matchups, then we'll get right into that right now. So King Arthur. So the thing about King Arthur is with removal of Glad Shield, he actually does get bullied in some matchups now, which is, I think, healthy for the lane, because before he was kind of just winning every single lane. But he's still very good in most of the matchups. He still has more damage, more abilities than basically every character that's being played in solo lane anyway. Obviously, the matchups that are going to hinder him a lot are characters that can cripple him. So Ardio, Ares are very good against him. Cerberus kind of takes a lot of his Stone of Gaia healing. It also removed a lot of his Glad Shield healing before, but either way, Cerberus is pretty good into him, just because Cerberus is kind of a big lane bully, and Arthur doesn't really have much to say about it. Sobek, a pretty bad matchup as well. Can interrupt a lot of your abilities with his knockup. Arthur does have knockup immunity on his 3, but he can always pluck it. Sobek never really is ever threatened by an Arthur, which is bad. And Arthur kind of wants to bully out the lane. And when it comes to the team fights, Sobek's going to do a lot to displace Arthur as well. When it comes to the 50-50 matchups, a lot of these gods are actually bullies. Like Hercules is a bully, Achilles is a bully, Osiris is a bully. But Arthur, just with these innate damage and how many abilities he always has up, he can kind of compete with them really well. So it's very 50-50, pretty much with all of these. Nike's the only one that's not a bully that you're kind of thinking, wow, Nike into Arthur, that might, I feel like Arthur should bully Nike pretty hard. But to be honest, Nike's clear is pretty good. It's really hard for Arthur to interrupt many of her abilities. She's knockup immune in her abilities, so it's hard for Arthur to interrupt those. And she can kind of just get out of the laning phase pretty well. Nike does that against a lot of characters pretty well these days. But again, they kind of she's kind of not that great in team fights anymore because of Sunder, so that's something you got to keep in mind. All the good matchups, basically Arthur can just bully. He can not cripple, but he can stun out or interrupt a lot of these characters' abilities, which puts them in a bad spot. He just has a lot more damage than a lot of these characters. And for example, something like Baron, he can kind of just have 18 escapes basically to get out of every single Baron route, every single Baron ult, and there's not much you can do. The cripple is going to come into effect with a lot of these characters. He's going to cripple out Thor, Hammer. He's going to cripple out Set's 3. Set can't even use his 3, let alone TP to his clone, which is kind of annoying as Set. If you're crippled, you're not even allowed to use your 3 just for the damage. Cripple out the Wukong 3s, the Vamana ones, the tier escapes, just kind of out damages and avoids everything that Bellona's doing because he's slow immune. So, yeah, kind of just bullies all these out. The only one you might be thinking is Cthulhu. That's an interesting matchup. Well, Arthur is basically knockup immune in his 3. It can be interrupted by Cthulhu's 3, but I just think he has so many abilities that he can force out Cthulhu's ult really often, which is really bad for Cthulhu because the best part of his kit is his ultimate. So that is King Arthur in his matchups. Mulan. So Mulan is a lane bully. She has a lot of good matchups because she just bullies out the lane and can win a lot of games because of that. but she also has a lot of matchups where she plays against other lane bullies and they can kind of fight back into her, and then her late game is pretty bad. So as long as they're the character that's fighting into her has just a little bit better of a late game and survives the laning phase or bullies her out, then she's going to be in a pretty bad spot. That's why she has a lot of 50-50 matchups. If you do end up bullying out in that laning phase and snowballing, then it's going to be really good for you, but she does fall off late game. Her bad matchups, Sobek, Hades, and Baron, they don't really ever feel threatened by her. Baron's really good into Mulan, in my opinion, because there's no way for her to immediately get out of his route. She can try and 3 the Baron to, obviously sash, basically, like Nazo sash her way out of it, but that's pretty hard to do. As long as Baron is cognizant of that and trying to juke and making it hard for her to do that, then it's a pretty bad matchup. Just kind of gets out cleared very, very hard early game by Hades, and can't also get out of his ult. That's another thing about Baron and Hades, is that Mulan has to ult out of his ult unless she has her 3 stacked up and can do it to a wall. But early game, Hades is going to be getting free ult and forcing Mulan ult on cooldown, which is not very good. You don't really want to have that when you're a lane bully. You don't want to get your ult forced on cooldown. As far as the good matchups, she can interrupt a lot of these abilities. It is difficult, but just the fact that she has crazy base damage early on, as you'll notice, most of these characters in here aren't very big lane bullies. They kind of want to get out of the laning phase as early as possible. Mulan, very, very good in the early game with her base damage. Kind of can just out-clear and out-damage these characters and bully them pretty hard. And then, like I said before, 50-50. A lot of these characters are lane bullies that can fight back into her, but, it kind of just comes down to who falls off the most late game. And, as you know, some of these characters do fall off. Some of them get even better. So Amaterasu, very good late game, but she can get bullied by Mulan, so she kind of just has to survive the laning phase when it comes to that. And then a character like Odin, you can't really get out of his cage because you can't 3 out of it and you can't ult out of it, but you will bully him in the early game. So just some things you got to keep in mind. Some of these characters counter Mulan in the team fights, but also get bullied in the lane. So just got to be on the lookout and practice those matchups as much as you possibly can. Nike, like I was talking about before, she can kind of get out of the laning phase pretty easily, but the problem is now that her team fight isn't amazing. Good matchup, she can just immune all of Tyr's knockups because she has knockup immunity on her 1 and her 2. Can bully out Vamana because he can't interrupt her abilities, and all these other characters as well. She kind of just can get loose against I always say the word loose if you guys don't know what I mean. It basically just means that you can get out of the laning phase, you can start rotating, you can start stealing back camps, you can start just proxying and being a general nuisance on the map, not being locked into your lane. You're getting more loose. And she's really good at doing that against all these characters. She's good into Sobek and Jorn because of the knockup immunity. Can kind of just run down Zhang, never is threatened by her. Their ult's very good against Zhang Kui. And the only thing you got to be careful of is that he can interrupt your abilities. But at the end of the day, even if you get your abilities interrupted as Nike, it's really not the end of the world. In fact, Amaterasu's in here. That's part of the reason that Alma's like a 50-50 matchup. Yeah, she'll silence out your abilities, but at the end of the day, your clear is still good with your AoE autos, and you're still going to be useful in the mid to late game. Well, I say that, but if the enemy team goes Sunder, then you're not going to be as useful. But you still have that Blink Initiate with your big slow and your ults. So something to keep in mind. Bad matchups. She does get hard bullied by Osiris, Kama, Cthulhu, Herc, all these characters. Obviously, Camazotz and Osiris can't really interrupt her abilities, which is a big deal, but at the end of the day, they just do so much damage. It's so hard to auto-trade with them. They're going to out-sustain you as well. That is pretty rough. And basically, Cthulhu's a bad matchup now because he can interrupt your abilities with his 3 because it's also a stun at the beginning of it because, why not? But also because he's basically just a better version of you now. Doesn't get countered as countered by Sunder, I should say. Does your job way better than you ever do and also will bully you out in the laning phase. So Mulan, the same thing, kind of just early bully. So you gotta be careful of those super early lane dominant gods when you're playing Nike because they can definitely snowball on you and make it hard for you to do your thing. But yeah, the only reason I would say Hades isn't as bad of a matchup, even though I just said you gotta be careful of those super early lane bullies, is that you can pretty much never ult a Nike. Her clear is good even if you interrupt it, like I was talking about before, and Hades is obviously very good at interrupting channel clear, but Nike doesn't have to worry about that as much as, like, let's say, like a Guan Yu or like a Tyr or anything like that, just because her clear is pretty good anyway with her cleave autos. Moving on. Odin. As you'll notice, just as the same as the last video, the more bad matchups or 50-50 matchups a character has, kind of is a sign that the character isn't as good, or maybe just isn't very meta in the moment, based on a lot of the good picks, but the same thing is true here for Odin. Quite a lot of bad matchups. Vamana used to be a really good matchup for him, but Vamana can ult out of his cage now, so that's definitely a matchup you want to avoid. You don't get any value out of your cage. You'll notice that the good matchups are the matchups that he gets a lot of value out of his cage and can interrupt their abilities. He can always jump out of Baron route, doesn't have to ever be worried about that. He does have to be a little bit worried if he's using his jump really aggressively to get ulted into tower, but at the end of the day, I think Odin is probably a pretty good matchup into Baron just because he can always lock him down with his stuns and his cage. Same thing goes for Ardio. They will have to buy Phantom. All these characters in the middle don't really have to buy Phantom. The only one you can maybe say is Amma and Achilles, but they're going to bully him really early on. If he's jumping the waves, Amma, Achilles, Hercules, Sobek, Wukong, all these characters are going to bully him if he jumps the waves. However, he does have a good matchup just because he can lock them down in the cage, which is a pretty big deal, and it's kind of the reason you pick Odin a lot of the time. And then all these bad matchups are basically matchups where he can't lock them down in the cage, and he also will be bullied. All of these characters, besides Arthur, I guess, can get out of the cage pretty easily. And even with Arthur can just charge ult him into the air, or charge ult anybody into the air when he gets Odin caged, which basically denies the value out of the Odin cage. So basically all the bad matchups are bullies that can also get out of the cage. So moving on, Osiris, I mean, people talked about it in the last video, but it's pretty obvious that Osiris wins most matchups. The only thing you gotta be careful with Osiris is that he falls off late game. So you kind of want to snowball most of your games. All the good matchups, his ultimate anti-heal is very good against Kama. It's very good against Achilles, Ardio, all these characters that rely on their sustain, Vamana, sustain set as well. He bullies all these characters pretty well. The 50-50 matchups are where he doesn't really bully them that hard, and it's also pretty easy for them to avoid his tether, avoid a lot of his poke, and maybe sustain it up as well. I just said, that he counters sustain, but in a different way. Like, you have to be able to get out of his tether and his slows while also being able to sustain. Amma's really good at that. Tyr's really good at that. Hades is okay at it, but Osiris is, that's a very 50-50 matchup. It can go crazy. Serb is good at that. All these characters can get out of his tether pretty easily and also sustain up. Whereas all these characters up here have a much harder time at getting out of the tether and fighting him into his auto attacks and his passive and everything. Bad matchups. Baron, the reason I always talk about this is Baron's a good matchup into Osiris because Osiris can't. It is impossible for Osiris to get out of Baron's route unless he ults. Unless he has beads, or unless he ults, or he gets cleansed somehow by a teammate, which means that in lane, every time Baron hits a 3, Baron will also hit a 2, who also hit a 1, which means he'll get a guaranteed heal because he hits his 2. And then he also can just get auto attacks off in between his abilities, which is just a ton of burst, and it makes it really hard for Osiris to do anything. Osiris also has to ult out of every single Baron out, so you can kind of see the problem with the matchup. So if you're ever trying to counterpick an Osiris, go for that Baron matchup. Sobek as well. Sobek doesn't have to be threatened by Osiris at all, and he'll be so much more useful in the mid to late game, so that's why it's a bad matchup. But in general, I think with the removal of Glad Shield, Osiris got a little bit less strong or a little worse. You haven't really been seeing me play him or many people play him at all, but I still think he's viable. And again, he's still one of the biggest lane bullies in Smite Smite's ever seen, to be honest, because of his passive and his low cooldowns and his auto tech damage and his clear and everything that he does well in lane. So definitely will be bullying a lot of people, but there are a lot of picks that you can get away with into him. Wukong. Wukong's one other character that you get loose on. He's like Vamana. He's like Nike. You basically just want to be clearing as fast as possible and rotating. That's where their strengths are. So because of that, he has a lot of 50-50 matchups. If you're not getting loose and you're kind of getting bullied by some of these characters like an Osiris, like an Cerberus, an Amma, a Camazotz, a Hades, if you're getting bullied by them, then it's gonna be worse for you. It's gonna be more towards these bad matchups. But he is very, very good at just clearing the wave and ignoring people and getting to back camps, getting to proxies. He's very hard to gank, so proxying is really good on him. If you can get really confident in your Wukong matchups and just start proxying, then you're going to be set. His good matchups are basically anything that it's really, really easy to get loose against. He can get loose against all these characters and not have a problem and not really get bullied. The bad matchups are the ones where like King Arthur can cripple him, Mulan can interrupt his 3s. These characters have so much damage for him and have interrupts. Obviously, Ardio has a cripple as well. Nike never has to be afraid of Wukong, and is probably a little bit more useful in the mid to late game. So all these characters bully him really hard and have interrupts for his escape. And Wukong does rely on his escape very often because you want to save your ultimate till the last minute, to the last second as Wukong, and be as greedy as you possibly can with it. All these characters can force out his ultimate pretty easily because they can interrupt his dash. So, and they're also lane bullies, if you can see. Moving on to Tyr. Tyr is another character. I mean, the thing about Tyr is that he has a lot of 50-50 matchups because he kind of does well in every single lane for the most part. At least he can like stalemate it, but his late game isn't really worth it to just be stalemating nonstop. If you're playing against a big lane bully and you just want to stalemate it, then yeah, that's why I think he has a lot of these 50-50 matchups where you're basically just stalling out the game and you're going to be as I guess, as useless as a character like Osiris late game. You're going to be as useless as like a Kokolin or a Camazotz in the late game. However, he does have some bad matchups. Basically, Chang'e anti-heal is really good against him, kind of pokes him out and is more useful late game. Artio is just going to completely annihilate him because of the cripples and the stuns for all of his abilities. Same thing with Hades, interrupt all of his abilities and just outclear him really hard, make it really hard for him early game. Jorm can never be fearless or knocked up, so not a great matchup. Ares, the cripple is insane. Arthur just going to bully him out and also have the cripple for tiers. So actually has some bad matchups, but at the end of the day, the bad matchups aren't even that horrible because you can just sit in blue stance and heal up on every single wave. But again, the problem with that is the payoff there? Is the payoff for tier late game even like worth it for you to be doing stuff like that? In my opinion, a lot of the time that's a no. But at the end of the day, if it's just a comfort pick for you and you just want to sit in blue stance, then that's something that you can do. His good matchups, he can interrupt some key abilities here. And a lot of, like, all three of these characters, or I guess maybe all four, maybe not Baron, but they kind of want to sit in the wave as they use their clear. Vamana wants to walk up to the wave and use his 3. Amma wants to walk up to the wave and use the 2. Bona wants to walk up the wave and use her 2. He can just fearless through both of them, or all three of them, and hit the wave, which is very, very valuable and makes it a good matchup. And won't ever get bullied by any of these characters. And then Vamana, last but certainly not least. Another character you want to get loose on, like I said before. That's why he has a lot of 50-50 matchups. He can get bullied by a lot of these characters, and probably will, but he's very safe because of his ultimate. Very, very hard to gank, so you can kind of just clear the wave and sit under your tower because his clear is very, very good as well. His good matchups never has to be worried about a Baron. He can always run him down, always get out of the Baron 3 and always avoid it. Same thing with Erling. You notice that Erling's a good matchup for basically everybody because Erling's so horrible. And then Odin as well, like I said before, he can get out of the Odin cage, can kind of bully him early on, and he basically just gets a free lane, which is very good for Vamana. The bad matchups are, again, they're the characters that can interrupt his dash. It's going to be really awkward for Vamana because he doesn't want to get his ult forced on cooldown. Most of these characters can do that. And most of these characters make it very, very hard for you to get loose because they kind of lock you down in that lane and keep bullying you. And, a character like a tier, like I just said before, Vamana wants to walk up the wave and clear it. Tier kind of interrupts that and makes it hard. Nike kind of just gets as loose as Vamana and pokes him out, and Vamana can't avoid her poke at all because she's knock-up immune. And all these other ones are basically just big lane bullies that make it very hard for Vamana to get loose and rotate around. So I know I repeated a lot there, but just trying to drive the point home. I didn't want to go over every single specific matchup and every god because, well, one, it changes a lot based on the items, but also because I want to give you guys like the general theme of why this character has a good matchup or why this character has a bad matchup so that you can kind of think for yourself, which is kind of the point of all my videos, maybe make you more independent and make you more, I guess, aware of how the game works and everything like that. So yeah, that is the part 2 to the god matchup. So we are now finished with all the warriors. Next up, we're going to go through the Guardians, or at least the viable Guardians. And since there aren't a ton of them, we'll probably go through the Guardians and the mages at the same time. Since there's only a few mages that are viable, and there's only, I guess, a handful, a hodgepodge, if you will, of Guardians that are viable. So be on the lookout for that. But yeah, I'll just go through it real quick again, just in case you want to, pause it at the end of the video for whatever reason. That was the matchups for the rest of the Warriors. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you learned something or, have a comment to ask me about a certain matchup or anything like that, feel free to do so in the comments. I'd greatly appreciate it. I'll try and get back to you. And keep in mind that comfortability is very, very important. So at the end of the day, if you're very, very comfortable on like Chalk and another person isn't very comfortable on like King Arthur, then you'll probably bully them out. Okay, confidence is very, very important. So make sure you recognize that when you go out there. Always play confident, even if you're worse than the opponent, because why not? You'll learn more from that. So yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Stay safe, stay healthy. Peace out. I love you all.